Hello, everybody. Kyle here. I just saw the new Joker film, Joker Folie, Deux, directed by Todd Phillips, starring Joaquin Phoenix, Lady Gaga, and I am here to give my review of this movie. I actually really loved this film. I thought it was incredibly different from what had come before, yet also I think feeling like its own continuation of the first film. This film mostly takes place in Arkham State Hospital, as it's known in this movie. And Arkham, I think, is really given more depth, I want to say, than it ever has before. Because usually, whenever we are in Arkham in like live action films, usually Arkham is like in maybe one or two scenes, and Batman Begins was probably the most we got out of it. And I think here it is done really well because it reminded me, and I believe that this is also the intention, that I think a lot of what Todd Phillips is basing off of in this movie is Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. He did it in the first film with the whole talk show scene, and in this movie we get a lot of like talk about rehabilitating these patients or finding their human selves that are within or that are being kind of hijacked by the jokers inside of them. And I think that was reminiscent of, in the graphic novel, there's a whole thing about the rehabilitation of both Joker and Harvey Dent, and a psychologist that seeks to, or a psychiatrist that seeks to, quote unquote, cure them. And I think that was really interesting to behold. Like, as a fan of the comics, as a fan of Joker as a character, I was surprised to see how connected some of it is actually to the comics. I won't say exactly what scenes because it does kind of spoil the movie, but I will say that going into it, I expected Harley Quinn to be depicted differently than she was in the film. And to ease a lot of concerns of some people, Harley Quinn in this movie is more similar to her character from the comics than you would assume from the trailers and even, I think, from the promotional material. That's all I'll say. I think that Joaquin, once again, I mean, it is his show in a way, but he really steals the spotlight whenever he's on screen as Joker and Arthur Fleck. And I think that he imbues something that is so different from what any other actor that's played the Joker character before has done. Of course, he's not in makeup the entire movie, so that does give him, a different type of performance than what we've seen before. But I think it really shows you his talents as an actor and how he can hide within himself and then let himself out when Arthur or when Joker needs to. I also really loved Lady Gaga in this movie. I've been a fan of all of her performances I've seen, from A Star is Born, House of Gucci, and once again, I think that she delivers. She's not in the film as much as I think the trailers kind of make it seem, like the whole Phoenix Gaga, like that. It's, I think, more Joaquin's show than it is hers, but when she's on screen, I think she makes an impact. I think that Harley Quinn here is done really brilliantly. Like, I think that there are moments where it feels like you don't know whether she's playing him or he's playing her, which is an interesting Joker Harley dynamic that we're accustomed to seeing, but the way they do it here, it's different than before. I loved the world that Todd Phillips has depicted, because what these movies are, these two Joker movies, they're like a part one, part two. And if part one was kind of like showing you, Arthur's rise to power, or like his final reclamation of who he is and who he wants people to see him as, this movie is the consequences of that. And can Arthur go back to the person he was before all of the events from the first movie started? And I think it is done really well. I think Todd Phillips has a deft touch when it comes to, depicting these characters in certain lights. I feel like it expands upon the character of Arthur. I've seen some reviews that have said that they think this is not just a regression of his character, but also an undermining of the first film. I don't necessarily agree with that, because I do think that this film, while it was actually never supposed to come out, like they never planned on a sequel to Joker, I do think this film does some very fascinating things with the characters from the first movie, primarily Arthur, but the idea of what he went through in the first movie and how that's affected him after, and how it's affected the rest of Gotham. The events of the first film are not like negated. Like what you see at the end of the first movie, when like all the rioters are going around with Joker masks, that is continued here. And there is a particular scene in the third act that blew me away, because I did not expect to see what happened in that third act. And when I saw, and you'll know it's, you could somewhat say it's like an action set piece, but when it happens, given the budget of this film too, I think that also helped it. It really knocked me off my feet. Like, I did not expect to see the story go there, and it somewhat sets up the world of this Gotham and the future of this Gotham, but also perfectly continues what was set up in the first movie. The musical components are very different from what we've seen in like any other comic book movie. I think that they provide a unique like perspective on Arthur and Harley, and like the state of what these characters are going through, how they feel, how they express their emotions. I will say sometimes a song might not have worked as much as another song did, but I still really appreciate how ambitious Todd Phillips was going for with these musical moments, because seriously, like, you've never seen this before in a comic book movie. I mean, you had like a musical moment in the Marvels. You also have like, I was doing research, like there was like a Superman musical on TV once, but like it's very hard to, I think, change genres or like change expectations when it comes to comic book movies, let alone comic book sequels. And I was just watching it, I was like, wow, this is really something that I think when we look back on this movie years to come, I think a lot more people will appreciate what Phillips was going for here, because it definitely gives us something that is different, and it doesn't feel like what we've seen before. And also, like, as a fan of Batman, as a fan of Joker, I really enjoyed watching this. Yes, it's an Elseworld story, but I think what really works is the fact that it does still feel like Gotham City. And I think sometimes if we look at, say, Sony and how they've conducted their Marvel universe, that does not feel like the Spider-Man comics at all. This, I think, sets up a future where you could see a Batman show up. You could see, these characters show up in Gotham, but it's not in this movie. It doesn't need to be in this movie. This movie is its own thing. But yeah, like, I think that this film is a terrific piece. I really wish that people going into this kind of didn't have as high of expectations as I think they may have had after seeing the first film, because I do wonder if that kind of hurts it. I think that these movies work both separately and together as like a part one, part two. And I mean, I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it had a lot to say about like not just mental health, but about how like the media portrays, killers, and how like sometimes you'll have a serial killer on trial and you see the idealization of that serial killer through whether it's fans in the crowd, whether it is those killers' own perceptions of themselves and how they present themselves on TV. And I mean, I think this movie, just like the first one, has a lot to say. I think that it does a lot of different things. Once again, I probably said the word different like 20 times in this review so far, but it really feels like its own being and its own thing, and it makes the character of Joker this like myth of sorts. And I don't want to spoil anything, but it's something that I thought was really cool, because you kind of see with this movie and the first movie how it's kind of like painting the idea of Joker as something that is not just a result of the city, but a result of the people that live there, and what sometimes they want, sometimes they don't want to aspire to be. And it's a really, I think, clever film with a lot to say, and some really great performances. Also, Brendan Gleeson is terrific in it, Catherine Keener. So yeah, I recommend seeing it. Don't go into it expecting the exact same movie. It is different than the first film. And don't go into it expecting, a straight up adaptation from the comics, because you can't adapt the comics word by word. Like, I think one of the closest things that we've seen was The Batman by Matt Reeves, but still, it's its own thing. It's in its own world. And I think that is something that will stand the test of time. I think especially like in years to come, I do feel that people will look back on both Joker 1 and Joker 2 and be like, wow, like they really pushed the limits. They were unrelenting on what they were trying to accomplish, and they made the movie they set out to make. It wasn't made by a corporation or a studio that said, okay, we need to make this way. They made the movie they wanted to make, and I think they did a great job at doing it. So thank you so much for watching this review. Let me know if you saw, or if you're going to see the movie, but if you saw the movie, let me know your thoughts. And have a nice day, everybody. Bye.